The time is 6:45 South Africa time, and a big welcome to everyone watching us around the world. A huge welcome to everyone. It feels like it's still summer in Johannesburg. It's been a remarkable last 2 weeks, and I'm so happy tonight as we've remained warm. The election season is heating up, and we've got lots to discuss this evening. So, Ivor, Chipkin, turn on your camera. Wayne Sussman will be joining us shortly. Queenin will be joining us as well. And let's talk about what's happening in the world other than elections, because we'll start at exactly 7 o'clock talking about elections. But Ivor, welcome. This is your first time on one of our webinars.
It is. I'm very pleased to be here. And excited. Well, the topic, of course, is very important, and especially on this forum. So I suspect the conversation is going to go in some interesting directions. That's what I'm expecting, at least.
Well, we hope so, because this is participation. So everyone will have questions and comments, and the more people who have questions and comments, the better for us. We absolutely love it. I see Danius Unavikis, the former Lithuanian ambassador to South Africa, has joined us. He's just said good evening to us. Danius, lovely to have you watching. But Ivor, while I have you, I want to talk about state capture. Because that's your area of expertise. You literally wrote the book on state capture. If you were to compare 6 years ago, prior to a Ramaphosa takeover of government, and the Zuma eras, has corruption gotten better or worse over that period?
So, Howard, of course, what we argued, which I think was correct, was that we drew a distinction between state capture and corruption. And we suggested that state capture wasn't just very severe corruption. We argued that state capture was much more political phenomenon related to an assault on the constitutional framework and the weakening of South Africa's democracy through the fundamental weakening of state institutions. So if you accept that framing of state capture, that is not just kind of people stealing money from the public purse, I think what we've seen is the state capture has been interrupted in South Africa. I think I'd like to say that the betrayal of the Promise Report and the movement, the social movement that emerged at the same time, played an important role in interrupting state capture. It certainly didn't defeat it, but I think that kind of severe assault on the constitutional framework has been interrupted. We certainly haven't seen the gains in the improvement in state institutions which we would have liked with the Ramaphosa administration. But I don't think we are suffering a major threat to the very fabric of democracy in South Africa anymore, which is how I understood state capture. Having said that, I mean, state corruption is still a major, very, very serious and alarming phenomenon, which has weakened and in some cases broken key state institutions. I mean, Eskom and Transnet in particular are showing signs of stabilizing, or maybe even that term is an exaggeration. I think the improvements in the electricity generation are not so much that Eskom is coming right, but more that there's been a massive uptake in private generation and a movement to solar, by private households and by business. But there has been a stabilization of a whole range of things, and I think we have to take credit for that. Civil society action, media action seems to have had an effect.
Of course, hindsight is an exact science. At the start of the Zondo Commission, were you hopeful that maybe people implicated would have been prosecuted, brought to justice? And what's your feeling in a sense now?
I wasn't sure how the Zondo Commission was going to be received at the end, to be honest. And I was a little disappointed that the Zondo Commission in the end didn't go far enough in explaining what state capture was. It issued, a 1,000-page report, which only a couple of geeks like myself have actually read. So I think this great opportunity to explain to South Africa what state capture was, why it was so terrible. I think the Zondo Commission could have done more there, but it did do an extraordinary job at putting monumental loads of information into the public domain, which I think are still there for us to use. And it did hold public officials and politicians accountable. I mean, it brought them into a kind of a judicial inquiry, into a judicial process where they were subjected to intense scrutiny. I did expect that some of those cases would be prosecuted, and that hasn't happened. But it did put a lot of it did give a sense that South Africa's institutions, if we work them correctly, have an astonishing and incredible ability to hold senior figures accountable. And that is what happened. I mean, Jacob Zuma, if you'll recall, was so threatened by the Zondo Commission that he refused to appear, which is why, of course, we know the story. You know, there was he was sentenced to jail. The response was that kind of almost brought the country down in an uprising it was June 2021. But it gives a sense of the power of these institutions and just how threatening they are to certain elites. So, yes, I maybe have some reservations about the Zondo Commission, but on the whole, I thought it was a remarkable exercise in accountability. Yes, of course, there's huge opportunities in scope still to prosecute many of those offenders, and hopefully that'll happen.
So, Wayne, we could in fact involve you in big questions of heady questions of issues of state, but there was a much more important thing that happened last night. Tyson Fury got into the ring. Tell us about last night's fight.
Howard, there are a big few days for the world right now, but definitely the most consequential thing in modern history took place last night in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. As you saw, the Ukrainian cruiserweight, Alexander Usyk, dressed like a Cossack, coming to the ring. He held 3 of the heavyweight belts, taking on the lineal champion, the Gypsy King, the 6'9" giant Tyson Fury. It was worth staying up until 2 o'clock in the morning for its conclusion. It was an incredible spectacle. One hopes that our elections is 50% as riveting as and exciting as this boxing world title fight was last night.
So for those of people who weren't as crazy as you and me who stayed up till 2 o'clock watching the fight, it was a close fight. It could have gone either way.
Correct. But the referee could have stopped the fight after the 9th round, where Tyson Fury did not know where he was. I think people would have been okay with the decision, but Tyson Fury, who I believe lost the fight, still showed remarkable powers of recovery to come back literally 60 seconds later and be able to defend himself. This is why it's an incredible sport. This is why it's important that people like Ivor, Chipkin, and all those listening now hear us have this conversation about a remarkable event. And what a moment for Ukraine. What a moment for Alexander Usyk.
Were you shouting Slava Ukraine during the fight?
I hope not. Goodness, I hope not. Please, Wayne, tell me you weren't. That is a slogan with a very, very disreputable history. So please, let's...
We were shouting positive encouragement for Alexander Usyk, who I think is a remarkable person, an Olympic gold medalist, a 2-time undisputed champion. This is very unprecedented, and he'll go down as a great. He could retire today, Howard Sackstein, but someone who certainly can't retire today is Ivor Chipkin. He's got a lot more important work to do in this country.
Well, before we get on to Ivor's work, I want to talk about something because last night was quite interesting, not just from a boxing perspective, but it once again puts a modernized Saudi Arabia front and center onto the world map. And Saudi Arabia, whether it's in golf or Formula One or boxing, is becoming this powerhouse of sport. And that looks very different geopolitically. The Middle East is looking a little different with MBS now ruling Saudi Arabia and trying to brush up a little bit of its image and pose it almost as a Western-facing, sports-orientated tourist destination, not just an oil giant. Ivor, what do you think?
I think there's some very profound shifts happening across the Middle East, and I think the political organization of these shifts is very interesting. And what I mean by that is the internal organization. Increasingly, United Arab Emirates and perhaps Saudi Arabia is also going this way, is a consolidation of political control by a small elite, extensive privileges to a small citizenry. And then a unexpected and extraordinary tolerance towards expats and foreigners to enter and come and do business in these zones and to make a go of it. It looks like Saudi Arabia is beginning to go in that direction. So you have a kind of the consolidation of an inner circle, those who are in terms of who have citizenship and who can benefit from the state, of which it's almost impossible for an outsider to access those benefits. But the outside of those citizenship rights is a space of tremendous opportunity for commercial and entrepreneurial activity and for new businesses, etc. I think it's a very innovative model, which has been pioneered by the UAE and Dubai and places like Dubai. I think that Saudi Arabia is realizing the extraordinary promise of such a model. Doesn't threaten the fundamental political integrity of the state. It doesn't challenge the political control of the existing elite, and yet it promises a quite diverse society and enormous economic benefits. So I think Saudi Arabia is potentially going in that direction.
So before I see Queenin is in and she's turned her camera on and off, but Wayne, we can't start, and we're starting in 3 minutes. This is our pre-chat. We can't start without making reference to the fact that it looks like the Iranian president and foreign minister have been killed this afternoon in a helicopter accident. How does that reshape the vision of the Middle East?
Well, that's look, we're waiting for more details, Howard. That this might be true. I've just come from another webinar. More research needs to be done. I think that the vice president, as my understanding from the Iranian constitution, will have to take place immediately. But we just need more details to emerge. Has an official statement been made at this hour yet?
No official statement, but one of the Farsi Telegram channels who are monitoring radio communications between rescue teams and the site say that they claim that the president's body has been found, but no official statement at this point in time.
I mean, one must remember that at the end of the day, the supreme leader, who wasn't affected by the helicopter accident, I think would remain provide the dominant direction and vision for Iran. But I don't know. I'm sure Ivor has other details, and I hope maybe Queenin as well.
Stop deflecting, Wade. I'm interested to hear what
Okay.
you have to say. I mean, at one point, I was a little worried that you two were going to have me in a boxing ring, or speaking about boxing, because that would have been
But you agree about the supreme leader. I mean, that is the person who gives the direction to Iran and how it positions itself within the region and the world.
I think so. I mean, I'm not a great expert on internal Iranian politics, but I think the elected leadership they have powerful positions, and I think Iran is at a very, very vulnerable position currently, both from internal politics but also externally. And I think if this turns out to not just be an accident, but it turns out to have been that helicopter was brought down either by internal opposition within Iran or potentially even by external, I mean, to be even perhaps potentially Israel, then I think these are very, very serious events. I mean, at this stage, there's absolutely no evidence or suggestion that this is not just, if they have died, that this is not an accident. But I suspect very, very soon we're going to hear speculation, or there'll be some sort of discussion about whether this helicopter was in fact taken down, and then the identity of who did. Well, that's going to be explosive stuff.
So, Queenin, have we chased you away? Are you hiding with your camera off? Please turn your camera on. The time has just gone 7 p.m. South Africa time, and a huge welcome to everyone who's watching us around the world. We've received a lot of interest, and tonight we're broadcasting this evening on Zoom, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Instagram Live. And just a reminder to everyone, this is a discussion. So please comment, question. If you're on Facebook, Zoom or YouTube, just leave a question. Dylan will bring all of the questions and comments across. But Queenin, just before we begin, a big welcome to you. Let's unmute you for a second.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Evening, and a huge thank you for joining us this evening. We have elections, 9 days away. We're in for a very interesting few weeks. Just before we begin, as we welcome everyone into the Zoom room, onto YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, if you're watching us on YouTube, please remember to click the like and subscribe button. That makes a big difference to us and allows us to be able to communicate with you better and notify you when we have more content for you to, in fact, watch. So if you're on YouTube, please do it now. Just click the subscribe button and let's make sure that we can stay in touch. Dylan, big welcome. You're on controls this evening. Lovely to have you here. I see we have people watching us from around the world. Mervyn just said he's watching us in Miami. We've got Cheryl who's watching us in Zurich. We've got Bern in Cape Town, Linda's in San Diego. So a big international audience this evening across all of our platforms and channels. So Dylan, many thanks for everything you're doing on controls tonight. As always, as we start off, we remind everyone that these webinars are brought to you free of charge by the South African Jewish Report. And you must, if you haven't seen the latest edition of the Jewish Report, please go out, get your copy, hard copy. Queenin, amazingly, we still publish in hard copy. About 33,000 people read us every week in hard copy. About 36,000 people get our newsletter every week. Hundreds of thousands of people come onto our website as well. And we've now been watched on our webinar series more than 5 million times. And on the front page of this week's edition of the Jewish Report, Dylan, if you'll actually show us what is there, don't forget, you can go, it's Hamas and its allies intensify their hate speech at the Sandton conference. You can pick up your edition at Discam, at Pick and Pay, at Spar, at Checkers, at your local butchery, at your school, wherever you go. We're distributing in free of charge in about 240 locations around the country. And if you prefer to read us online, as many hundreds of thousands of people in fact do, you can go onto our website, www.sajr.co.za, and you can either download the full edition or alternatively you can read each individual article as it comes out. And many people wait for Wednesday evening about 6 o'clock. We put the publication to bed and people come on at 6:05 and 6:10 and download the entire publication before we can even get it to the printers to print and distribute on a Thursday morning. Don't forget our webinars as well are available either on YouTube or you can go onto our website, sajr.co.za, and you just click on webinars and all 168 of our webinars are there and you can go watch all of them. 2 weeks ago, we did an amazing webinar with Gershon Baskin, the guy who started the hostage negotiations for Gilad Shalit. I think it's one of the most interesting webinars we've ever done, now watched by more than 10,000 people. So if you haven't watched, please go, have a look. We'd love to hear from you, hear what you think about it. Is he naive? Is he just idealistic? Or has he contributed more to saving human lives than almost anyone else that we know? So a big welcome to everyone this evening. Lovely to have you here, and we have such an amazing, illustrious panel. Guys, we never introduce anyone. We've told everyone on WhatsApps and emails exactly who you are. So we want to jump in, and tonight we've got to start a round of questions. So Queenin, unmute yourselves. All of our answers and our questions are very short and sharp and sweet. So guys, let's help by starting with some very practical questions about elections. Now, you know that they say that only fools and prophets predict the future. So I don't know if you're going to be the fool or the prophet tonight, but we're going to get you to nail your opinions to the mast and actually try find out exactly what you think. But let's start off with some very, very practical questions. Guys, let's start in the beginning. Must I be registered to vote in these elections? Is registration a requirement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. If I haven't yet registered, can I still register?
No. Not for this election. You can register for a future election.
But registration for this election is completely closed.
Is completely closed and but it's completely closed.
Okay. Where must I go vote?
Okay, I'll just keep going for now.
Keep going, but
you're the expert.
So you have to vote at the station you're registered in. If you didn't want to vote at the station you're registered in, you had to change that by Friday. So if I am registered at the OR Tambo High School in Lusikisiki in the Eastern Cape, I have to vote there on election day if I want to vote. You have to vote at the station you're registered. So let me give a more simple example. If you're registered at H.A. Jack Primary, but you now live by in Greenside, you have to go back on election day and vote at H.A. Jack Primary. If you are not showing up at the station you're registered in, you'll not be able to vote. You will not be able to vote in this election.
So let us say, for example, I am away from my voting district on voting day. I can't get to the voting station where I'm registered. Can I still vote? Did I hear you say no?
Sadly not. You have missed the two opportunities you had. So the answer is no.
Now, let us say I was actually very clever and I submitted, I think it's a 24A form that says I'm not going to be in my voting station on voting day. If I've done that, can I register? Can I go and vote somewhere else if I've submitted a form 24A? And if you haven't already done it, it's too late to do it if you haven't already submitted your 24A form.
Yes, you can.
Okay. What happens if I'm overseas on the 29th of May?
Well, you've missed the boat. You could have voted overseas. I mean, we saw incredible crowds in places like London and The Hague in the Netherlands, but you've missed that opportunity. So on the 27th and the 28th of May, those people who are old or infirm or heavily pregnant who cannot get to their polling station, or doctors or nurses who have to work on election day, they'll have the opportunity of getting a special vote, but that application period has also closed. So your only opportunity right now is to vote at the station you registered at.
Now, many people actually applied for a special vote, and you could do it via SMS. You sent an SMS to a number and you got a response back to say, we've accepted your application for a special vote. So if I've done that already, that means, just to repeat, on the 27th and 28th, I can go through to my polling station the day before and 2 days before actual voting, and I can cast a special vote if I've already applied. But if I haven't applied already, too late. Is that correct, Wayne?
Correct, too late. So the polling station times, which I think will be slightly shorter for those special votes, that'll be open. But if you haven't applied, it is too late.
Let's talk about on election day. Polling stations are open what time to what time?
7 o'clock in the morning until 9 o'clock at night. I don't advise this at all, but if you arrive at your voting station at 8:45, the IEC has to allow you to vote. They have to allow you to vote, but essentially 7 o'clock in the morning till 9 o'clock at night. And my advice is be patient. It's a good thing if you have to wait a long time to vote. Take a book, take a podcast, take a friend, and be prepared to hopefully queue for a long time, because that's a good sign for our democracy and a good sign for the election.
So actually, it turns out that people come really early. So people start queuing 6 a.m. in the morning to vote at 7. So it's busy around 7, 8, 9 o'clock. It dips down around 10 and 11 and then picks up a little again, dips down over lunchtime. So if you want to know when your polling station is going to be least busy to go around an 11 o'clock and go around a 1, 2 o'clock. Those are probably the times that your polling station will be least busy. Now, Wayne, or to the others, if I'm going to go in, how many ballot papers am I going to get, and how many ballot papers must I fill in?
Queenin, do you want to go?
No, go ahead, Dwayne. Please do your
Okay,
thing.
sure. But I joined this podcast to listen to you and Ivor. Okay. And to talk about boxing. So we are going to get 3 ballots for the first time ever in a national election. Usually we get a national ballot where you're voting for the 400 members of the National Assembly. of which where the president will come from, and you get a provincial ballot. So if you're sitting in Gauteng, you'll get a Gauteng provincial ballot. If you're sitting in the Western Cape, or Western Cape provincial ballot.
And that's for the provincial legislature. That's not for the National Assembly.
That is correct. So that's the national ballot and the provincial ballot. This time, we will get, for the first time in history, a regional ballot. And this is designed to allow better regional representativity in the National Assembly. Okay, so in the Parliament, the National Assembly, the Parliament, same thing. So 200 people will come off your national ballot. The other 200, Parliament's still the same size, it's 400. The other 200 will come off the regional ballot. So if you are sitting like me in the great province of Gauteng tonight, there'll be 47 out of those 200 people coming off the regional ballot. If you're sitting in the Western Cape, I think the number is 19 off the top of my head. 19 people will come out of the Western Cape. So let's say hypothetically, the Freedom Front is going to win 50% of the vote in the Western Cape. They'll send between 9 and 10 people off that regional ballot to Parliament, if that makes sense. And what's also unique, I know I'm speaking a lot here, is that on the regional ballot and potentially on the provincial ballot, there'll be another new thing we've never seen in an election before. And that is the idea of an independent candidate, a candidate who's not linked to any political party. They are standing for themselves and hoping to represent you. They will not be on the national ballot. They can only be on the regional ballot or on the provincial ballot. So these are two of the things which makes this election different to any other election.
So just to recap, the national ballot looks the same for everyone in the country, but your regional ballot will be different in every province, depending on which parties are contesting that region and which independents are contesting that region as well.
Correct. So in Cape Town, Zaki Ahmed, the famous social activist, he will, in the Western Cape, his name will be on the Western Cape regional ballot. In Johannesburg,
we're talking about boxing. Let's actually talk about world heavyweight boxing champion. This is heavyweight.
He wasn't heavyweight. Lovemore
Ndu in Limpopo standing as an independent.
Correct. And then Gauteng, I think the former Cope MP, Anele Mda. So we do have these individuals. So they won't have so let's say the ANC. Okay, so you'll have, I'm not talking about the national, the regional, the provincial. You'll see the African National Congress. You'll see their party logo, and you'll see the face of their leader. With the independents, they will not have a logo. It will just be their name and a picture of them, but they will not have a logo because they are running as an independent. So these are some of the different things this time round.
And
so now, Wayne, please,
Ivor. Wayne, just explain this then. And how will this affect the relation between the proportional vote?
No, too complicated. We'll get onto that later. But Ivor, I want to ask you, do you have to vote for the same party on all three of your ballots, or can you vote differently on every ballot?
You can definitely vote differently on your different ballots. So
okay.
you can vote for a particular party for national parliament. You can vote for a particular independent for a regional votes, and you can vote differently at the provincial level. So you've effectively got a choice of three.
So, Wayne, how many parties will I find on my national ballot?
Yeah, I think the number is 56.
52.
52. Okay, but it's an enormous amount. So it's going to be a
two columns for the first time.
2 columns. So practice your folding. I remember the last election, the ballot being so long, and it was complicated folding that ballot paper. It's going to be even longer this time. And take time to vote, because you might end up voting for a party you didn't intend voting for. It's going to be a very interesting process.
So, guys, I want to ask the question. This is maybe, Queen, I'm going to say, is there a sort of thing as a lost vote? So if I'm in, for example, the United Kingdom and I vote for a party that doesn't win an award, my vote doesn't count for anything. But South Africa has a proportional representation system. So is there ever such a thing as a lost vote?
think there's ever such a thing as a lost vote, because we have a PR system. But besides that, I think every vote counts. And I think what's important about our budding democracy is that we have so many political parties and so many options. And I don't see it ever being a lost vote if you are voting for any political party, whether they're big or small.
So Wayne, how many votes would I actually need to get elected into parliament?
How long is a piece of string? So in 2019, Al Jamaa got in with naught. Okay, there's a formula, but essentially there are 400 seats in parliament. So it means that you need 0.25%, a quarter of a percent, to get a seat. Al Jamaa got in with 0.18%. Because of something called the remainder in 2019, and they only got 31,000 votes. So I would think that you would need 36 to 40,000 votes, I think, will qualify for a seat. Of course, those numbers can shift. However, and I don't want to make it too complicated, for an independent candidate, it's far more votes, and therefore a much tougher undertaking. But I would say, right as of today, when I think of the turnout, 36 to 40,000 votes will probably get you that seat in the parliament.
I'm going to say, to be safe, 45,000 for a party and 90,000 for an independent to guarantee them a seat in the National Assembly. I think that's probably where we're heading. So when will we know the results? How long does it take us? 9 o'clock on the 29th, voting stops unless you're still in what's called the inner circle, and then you're still entitled to vote. But when will we generally know what the election results look like?
Great question. So I asked the IEC this question this week, because there was a concern that, look, we must be critical of politicians and critical of the IEC, and they don't do their job. But this is an arduous task. I mean, polling people get there at about, Howard, you know the exact time, I imagine 6 o'clock in the morning, to open the polls at 7. They stay open until 9 o'clock at night. And I'm including the party agents as well. And then no one gets to go home and have a well-deserved rest. I confirmed with the IEC, even though there's an additional ballot, and we expect the count to be longer than usual. I want to explain why again, because there's a third ballot. So the process will be longer this time. We expect the count to be longer. I know as I'm going to be on ENCA, we'll only start broadcasting results from 5 o'clock in the morning the next day. But I think by 3 o'clock that morning, we'll start getting some interesting indications, Howard, of what's happening. And look, the tradition is that the results are proclaimed or final, are formally announced on Saturday evening. So the election's on a Wednesday. By Saturday evening, the results are formal. But I would say by Friday, the latest Friday morning, we should have a very good idea of how things have fell, how the cards have fell.
I just want to give everyone a sense of what happens when the polling station closes and the count begins. So the first thing that happens is all the ballot boxes are sealed, and all the political parties who are there, who have representatives in the polling station, sign it. So you know the seal has not been broken. Then they work out how many ballots were issued from that polling station. Let's us say 2,100 ballots were issued. They then, in front of all of the party agents, break the seal, open up all the boxes, unfold all of the papers face down. And when you do that face down, you make sure that the secret stamp, which is unique to that polling station, appears on the back of every ballot paper. And you will divide the provincial into one pile, the national into another pile, the regional into a third pile, and you will count. Without looking at who people voted for, you actually count how many ballots are actually there to make sure that there aren't more ballots than were issued by the presiding officer. And you also make sure that the back of every ballot contains the secret stamp of the presiding officer, otherwise it's not valid. Once that's all been verified, you then turn over, and in the presence of all of the party agents, you start counting. You pull out one and everyone looks at it and says, this vote is for the ACDP, and it goes into an ACDP pile. The next vote is for the AIM, goes into the AIM file. For every 10 ballots that are there, you get a paper clip put into it. For every 10 paper clips that are issued, you put a rubber band around it. And that's why all the counting happens with all of the political parties busy watching, and at any point in time, anyone can object and say, no, you're incorrect. That isn't an IFP vote. The cross is outside the square. Or someone ticked rather than crossed. And each ballot is almost fought over. And because we have an extra ballot, it will take us much longer to do that. But of course, this is going to happen at the polling station where you voted in about 23,500 different locations around the country. And that's why the task is so arduous, why it takes so long to actually get a result. And Wayne, do you know which is the polling station which always brings in the first result?
No, but in England, in the UK, there's that tradition, Howard. But does that tradition exist in South Africa? I would think it's like a far-flung voting district in the northwest where the Freedom Front does well, and then people think, wow, the Freedom Front are doing very well in the northwest. Is there a particular station which declares first?
Yes, it's always Robben Island, which only has about 50 or 60 voters on. They can finish within about half an hour, 45 minutes.
Okay. But I wouldn't read too much into that. Yes.
Someone is asking whether you have to bring your own pen or pencil to vote.
No, but I mean, it's not a bad idea because you are going to be queuing for a long time. So take it to do your crossword puzzle and your Sudoku. They do offer pens, but just why not bring your own? It's not a bad idea. So, Howard, there's also this question about the 3 voting papers having to be folded together. You're going to put your vote in, you put it in different ballots, correct? You put the national in the national box, the provincial in the provincial box, and the regional in the regional box.
Everyone always messes it up. That's the ideal. But what they'll do is, because they're color-coded differently this year, it will be easy to sort them afterwards. I see a lot of people are very concerned whether it's a public holiday on election day. Is it a public holiday?
It is a public holiday, but you're only allowed to celebrate the public holiday once you have voted.
Okay, so question
I agree with you, Wayne.
Okay.
It's not a Friday. It's not a Friday.
Queenin, are these elections going to be free and fair?
I mean, from what I can see, the IEC has really worked hard to ensure that the elections will be free and fair. I think even throughout the heavy contestation between political parties, concerns raised by the DA as well around having the right kind of observers for the elections also came up. And I do believe that the IEC has done everything in its power to maintain its integrity as an institution that has to deliver the best and most fair vote or election this year. So I do believe that.
Okay, so Ivor, what happens if we declare the results on Saturday night, as Wayne predicts, and no one's received a majority? What happens?
Well, there will be, you mean an absolute majority of more than 50%?
Correct.
There will be a winner, and that winning party will be pushed into coalition discussions to form a majority and be asked and then invited to form a parliament, form a government. So there will be all sorts of haggling around a coalition to get over the 50% mark, which will allow a coalition that makes it over that mark to form a government. So that's what's going to happen. Can I just say one thing about free and fair? I mean, I think the IEC has got an extraordinary record in this regard. It's a very, very impressive institution. It's handled every election with great professionalism, and we've had almost no incidents in any of the elections, and including in times which are really, really very, very difficult times. This election, though, is potentially unprecedented in the level of contestation in certain areas, especially KZN, and I have concerns about some of the more remote areas, the risks of violence. So I think it's going to be a free and fair election, but I don't think I think the possibility of incidents occurring in some of the rural voting stations, I don't think we should rule it out. Having said that, I'm pretty sure that they won't in any way call into question the larger election. But I do think things are quite fraught, especially the levels of it, the intensity of the competition in KZN is of a particularly acute nature with MK, with the ANC, with the IFP, with IFP, with the EFF. I do think there's a risk of things degenerating. I don't know if Wayne agrees with that or Queenin agrees with me on that, but
Queenin,
yeah.
let's just ask this question before. We've seen in previous elections, and I want to go back to kind of 1994 and a little bit of 1999, that sometimes contestation in KwaZulu-Natal and the cheating of elections was violence to prevent people going to the poll. Do you think we have a risk, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal, that there may be violence during these elections at all?
I think because it's a highly contested space, I don't think we should rule it out completely at this point, right? I think there are certain political parties that have set their sights on winning the majority in KZN. The stakes are high, and it's the province with the second highest registered voters in this election. So it's quite an important province, and for any political party to thrive in this election, they need to do well in KZN and in Gauteng. So I do anticipate that there should be, high kind of security around voting stations in KZN. I don't want to mention any parties, but there are some support groups or organizations which will not be able to, I believe, stomach the results potentially. I do believe that, because KZN is also known for a lot of political killings, we know the extent of violence that could break out in the province. And I would say that there should be tight security and ways to mitigate this.
Okay. Wayne, now that I think we've gotten through our initial questions, I want to talk to the big themes of these elections. Can you pull out 2 or 3 themes that you think will impact on what's going to happen on the 29th of May?
Sure. I just want to add one more province I'd look at for potential violence. That's maybe in Mpumalanga, where we have had violence not related to ANC versus MK, often intra-party violence. So those are the 2 provinces I'm watching just first. I agree with the panelists about KwaZulu-Natal, but I think we must pay attention to Mpumalanga as well. So I have looked at what happened in 2019, looked at what happened in 2021, and looked at all the by-elections which have happened since 2021. And I think there are a few themes which have emerged, and we've just touched on the one. KwaZulu-Natal, there's absolute chaos in the KwaZulu-Natal electoral kraal, to use some nice alliteration. And I want to remind the viewers, and what was unbelievable is that when Jacob Zuma in 2014, the ANC got 65% of the vote on the provincial ballot in KwaZulu-Natal. Jacob Zuma turned KwaZulu-Natal into very safe ANC territory. You look at that part of KwaZulu-Natal, essentially from Durban, just south of Durban, all the way to the Eastern Cape border. You can picture on the map. And those areas, Howard, were as staunchly ANC as much of the former homelands in the Eastern Cape were. It was Jacob Zuma's gift to the ANC. And what we have seen, certainly since the 2021 local government elections, where the ANC fell under 50% in KZN, is that the IFP have been resurgent. And this was very apparent in 2021. And there was another key development in 2022 where the EFF ended their cooperation agreement to the IFP. And the way the EFF did this was in quite an aggressive manner. They were very insulting of the IFP. And I think a lot of voters saw this as a big sign of disrespect. And what we have seen is that the EFF support hasn't declined, it's essentially collapsed in KwaZulu-Natal. So in an environment where the ANC is on the back foot, You're in an environment where the EFF's really battling. You'd expect the IFP to be the major winner. But in middle of December last year, while people were planning their festive seasons, I think Jewish people were thinking about latkes, Christian people were thinking about Christmas, maybe some holidays. And there was a major development which, in a way, discounts a lot of these trends I've just given you, Howard. And that is the former president, 82-year-old Jacob Zuma, decided to form his own party called uMkhonto Sizwe. And this party has taken KwaZulu-Natal by storm. But it's really created an energy and a buzz. And this is the big unknown in this election. Why? Because Queenin said it earlier. 1 in 5 voters in this country are in the great province of KwaZulu-Natal. Some of those people from the great province of KwaZulu-Natal are probably watching tonight. And we also know that Zulu is a very widely spoken language in Gauteng and in Mpumalanga. So this is the big unknown. The fact that MK are on the rise. And by the way, they are taking votes. I said that the ANC are in trouble, and I said the EFF are in trouble because of Natal. Well, the IFP are also in trouble. Why is this? And then I'll keep quiet. I was giving short answers in the beginning, so let's try to keep with that tradition, Howard. I'll try my best. I want us to take a step back. In the last 24 months, we've seen the Zulu king pass away. That succession plan has not been a success. You've seen the Zulu kingdom, this vital institution in KwaZulu-Natal, show signs of stress. Mangosuthu Buthelezi, the founding father of the ENCA Freedom Party, a person who's played an outsized role in KwaZulu-Natal political history, a person who was very senior in the Zulu royal family and an advisor to the Zulu royal family, also passed away. So the IFP, the party which was in control of KwaZulu-Natal for the first 2 elections, was also showing stress. And thirdly, the African National Congress, the party which gave the country and Jacob Zuma, people like Zweli Mkhize, these outsized people who are having a big impact beyond the borders of KwaZulu-Natal, were either leaving the party or facing charges. And what you see today is very weak leadership of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. So these 3 formidable institutions in KwaZulu-Natal politics are showing signs of stress. And this is one of the reasons why MK is taking advantage of it and is the big story of this election.
So, Queenin, if you look at the campaigns that we've seen, how do you think they've gone? Rate for us, how do you think the ANC has done? How's the DA done? How's the IFP done? How's EFF and MK? Let's look at those 5. Good campaigns, bad campaigns. What do you think of the campaigns that you've seen and the rallies that we're seeing? Because, of course, the final week of elections is all about theatre. And these massive rallies that we're seeing around the place, including a massive MK rally yesterday in Soweto, becomes part of that theatre. Rate for us how you think those campaigns are going.
So when we look at the ANC campaign, I must say the ANC has been divided in the past. We all know how fractured the party is. But right now, during election season, they've managed to pull together also their limited resources, because we know that they've also had a lot of financial constraints. And they have been able to formulate, quite a solid campaign, surprisingly. The ANC comes into this election season, as I said, a bit financially overstretched, because unlike other parties, if you've noticed, wherever you go, you'll see the ANC doesn't really have the most posters out here. I think they are outdone by parties, even new parties like Rise Mzansi, like Bosa, they've been able to garner enough financial support to have that. So the ANC comes in stretched, but has a lot of people on the ground, and that's always been the advantage as an organization, having such a huge organization, having so much representation from regional right up until national level, popularity of their leaders. That has really been an advantage for the party. And also because now we are living in a world of, a lot of social media, I think that the ANC right now in the digital space, they have really done well with their digital campaign to ensure that young people are also involved and they know what they want to bring forward, if they do vote for the ANC. So that's how I would rate the campaign more or less. I think that when we look at the DA campaign, also the DA launched very good campaign. And I think also because they launched at a time where they won the case on cadre deployment, it kind of boosted their campaign. And I went to the manifesto launch, and that's I think just the week after we knew that they won the case. And, it was something that party leader John Steenhuisen could talk about and, speak about excitingly and say that, the DA is making strides in certain ways, and they're using the courts to make sure that the ANC is accountable. So they've also had a good campaign. The EFF this year, I mean, I think last year they had their birthday celebration, and it was such a banger. Everyone was talking about it. But I find that the EFF campaign this year is very mum. I don't know what's happening, but it's not as vibrant and exciting as I thought it would be. I think that maybe it is because, unlike the ANC and maybe the DA, the EFF is particularly dependent on its leader, Julius Malema, to be the face of the campaign. So you can see how Julius is crisscrossing around the country, campaigning everywhere and anywhere. And it's almost as if some of the leaders in the party themselves cannot stand up and campaign independently without his face, without his voice. So I find that a bit problematic, and I think it does come across in the election campaign this time around. And when we talk about KZN, particularly what Wayne said, it's very concerning where they stand right now in KZN. And I don't know if it is maybe one of the reasons why they're not, upbeat and excited. I think MK really came at the last minute and caused an upset. And, I was at the MK manifesto yesterday, and they purposefully waited until the last minute to have their manifesto because they wanted it to be fresh in people's minds as they go and vote in the coming week. So MK has been very strategic about how they garner media attention, especially. And I think that Zuma is very good at keeping the media interested and baiting us and making sure that we cover whatever that he is involved with. And I think that has been his strength because he has a very big pull, not only politically, but I think that he was able to take the spotlight away from parties that are bigger and more established than the MK party. So if I were to rate the parties, nothing exciting. I think, what's disappointing about the ANC is that, they are campaigning based on, their own failures, which makes their campaign a bit frustrating for any citizen. But I think so far this year, I think the DA and DA, ANC, and MK, they've really done kind of well when it comes to the campaigning, and they've been very strategic about how they go about it.
I want to pose that question to Ivor Chipkin as well, because Ivor, this is my assessment of the campaigns. The ANC has gone to dig up their dead leaders. So you have Mbeki and Motlanthe going to campaign. The dead have been resurrected to try and campaign because of the lack of popularity of their current leaders. You've got the IFP, who wherever you go, every single poster has a dead man on it. You've got Buthelezi on every single one of their posters. In the DA, if you're going to the townships, none of their posters have pictures of John Steenhuisen on because he's white and inappropriate to put into the township. So you've got the dead competing against the ghosts, competing against the invisible man. It's the strangest elections. And then you have MK with their election posters with Jacob Zuma on, and constitutionally whether he's allowed to be in parliament or not. And my understanding is his ambition is to be premier of KwaZulu-Natal, not to be in parliament. But you've got Jacob Zuma as their presidential candidate, knowing full well that in terms of the constitution, he has served his 2 terms and can never be president again. This is the ghosts versus the dead versus the invisible in this election. What do you think, Ivor?
Yeah, I think this is why you're a newspaper man, Howard. I think it's a fantastic metaphor. Ghosts in the absence and the dead. And I think that goes far in helping us understand what's going on here. I don't think, though, that we should underestimate how skillful some of these campaigns are. And I think the ANC campaign is starting to come together. I know that Johnny Steinberg wrote a furious critique of polling in South Africa a couple of weeks ago. So perhaps one shouldn't one shouldn't follow too closely what the polls are saying. But new polls are suggesting that the ANC vote is starting to tick up, and tick up in some cases fairly dramatically, especially if the turnout is higher in the range of 66% or 62% even. I've been following ANC trends now for a long time, and I wrote a piece in 2016, which I suggested that the ANC was going to be falling per election by about 4 to 6%, and I think that's been roughly correct. What kept them going was the remarkable turnaround in KZN achieved by Jacob Zuma. So whereas across the entire country, ANC support was falling by 4 to 6%, sometimes 8%, especially in areas like Limpopo, even though extraordinary majorities went from the 80s to the 90s to the 70s to the 60s to even the 50s. It was in KZN that went in the other direction. Under Jacob Zuma, the ANC had these huge gains, and because the KZN is important electorally, both strategically but also in numbers, the number of people which contribute to the provincial vote but also to the national vote, it really affected the ANC's general electoral prospects, which is why I think the ANC are sending so many of their heavy hitters back into KZN to see whether they can recover something there. So this election, I think, is what you're seeing is the expression of a trend which has been unfolding now for a very, very long time. I know everyone likes to think that this is a kind of a watershed, that the ANC everyone's suddenly woken up to how problematic the ANC is. But I think what you're seeing here is the unfolding of a general trend. But in this regard, I think the ANC have been very effective. They've managed to unite in a way in which they haven't been able to over the last decade or so. So the fact that they could deploy an Mbeki into various areas, they can deploy a Kgalema Motlanthe, they can deploy their heavy hitters in a way that they couldn't do during the state capture years, during the Jacob Zuma years, I think is a sign that something key in the organization is actually holding. So I wouldn't underestimate the ANC. And what I've been saying for a while now is that all the polls are predicting sort of mid-40s, even low 40s. I wouldn't be, if on Saturday night I heard that the ANC had come in at 49, 50%, I wouldn't be surprised. I think a majority is still within reach from the ANC. There's one other thing as well, which for this particular forum, I know is going to be very controversial. But I think the ICJ case has done something to ANC, which I'm not sure it's going to have huge electoral consequences. But I do think what it's helped them do is restore this idea that the ANC is a party of, and I know a lot of the audience in this podcast are going to be aghast with these remarks, but nonetheless, I think for many people in South Africa and around the world, the ICJ case is a symptom that the ANC and this government is a party of integrity and a party of principle. And even though amongst many of the middle classes, I suspect what's going to happen in the urban areas is that people that are disheartened with the ANC and were no longer voting for them, but may have voted for an opposition party, I think that in this election, this rebranding of the ANC as a party of principle and integrity, which I think the ICJ case has achieved, I think they might not switch. I don't know if they'll continue to vote for the ANC. They might remain at home. I'm not sure that they're going to switch in a way in which many people might be predicting that they will be. So I think this is going to be a more interesting election than we expect, partly because I think that the ANC are going to do a little bit better than the polls have been suggesting. I know that that's very controversial, and I might be eating my dinner,
your humble pie.
My humble pie on Saturday night or Sunday morning, but my gut tells me that the ANC are going to come in at 48 to 50%.
So just before I go into the issue,
I agree with you, Ivor. Can I just say, I think, sure. Howard, I agree with Ivor on the ANC still winning elections nationally. I do see that. And being on the ground as a reporter, speaking to people on the ground, it's shocking how they say they would rather vote for the devil they know.
right? That's always been the rhetoric. I mean, throughout my coverage right now, I've realized that what we see, obviously, on social media, that is just a microcosm of actually what people are saying. We can't take social media as the alpha and omega and truth when it comes to these elections. I think that I've seen something else. I've seen the force that they have on the ground. And I think at the end of the day, when you have a constituency, that's what matters. And I do think they will win nationally, and that they will only be punished in KZN and maybe Gauteng as well.
So, Ivor, just before we go into the issue of polls and where we currently stand, there have been 2 polls done on whether the RCJ case is a vote winner or vote loser for the ANC. One done by Brentworth and one done by SRF. And both of them overwhelmingly indicate that it is a vote loser for the ANC. Voters in South Africa are generally conservative Christians. They believe that the ANC has taken the other side, and overwhelmingly both polls indicate, in fact, the ANC will lose votes as a result of their RCJ action. Whether the polls are correct or not, who knows, but those are the 2 polls that have been taken.
So I'm profoundly skeptical of those results, because I don't think the ICJ case is important enough for South Africans for it to be a vote changer in any way. So I don't think people are going to vote or not vote for the ANC on the basis of the ICJ case.
So, for example, the SRF poll says the stance taken at the RCJ, are you more likely, less likely to vote for the ANC? 55% of people don't care either way. 23% of people say they're less likely. 17% say more likely. So, based on that, but it's not a big issue in people's lives in South Africa.
But again, I'll be eating humble pie again, and I'll, putting my neck on the line again. I'd be surprised, for example, if the ICJ case has much consequences for the DA in the Western Cape. I doubt that Western Cape voters, even if they feel very strongly about the situation in Gaza, are going to use that passion to vote ANC in the Western Cape. But I do think, nonetheless, that it has allowed the ANC to re-establish in certain key quarters and constituencies an image that parts of the organization are still driven by principle and integrity. And what I do expect politically, I don't think it's going to affect the election too much, but I do expect politically that if the ANC do well in this election, 48%, I think that'd be a big achievement for them. 48, even 50%. I think the huge winners of this election are going to be Durko, going to be Zane Dango, and it's going to be Naledi Pandor. I think they're going to be, even if it's not true, I think there's going to be a lot in the ANC who interpret that as a sign of the success of the importance and of the value of a Naledi Pandor and that approach inside.
And maybe Iranian funding of the ANC.
Well, I see that there's a huge claim in the US now on Iranian funding, and there's a huge letter with lots of signatures by prominent Americans claiming that there's Iranian funding to the ANC. I can only hope that the letter is backed by real evidence.
Wayne, I want to talk about polls now. You have access to a poll that was released today. It's your ENCA mark data poll. How many people were polled?
3,046 people.
And what can you share with us? First of all, on an overall level in the country, and then let's drill down maybe into some of the provinces. But we know, people lie to pollsters, but it's still the best information we have at this point in time. Tell us what the results are looking like based on, I think you released the results this afternoon.
That's correct. It was released at 12 o'clock today. So I would say that this is the second public platform which is hearing these results. And again, whenever I give data, we compare it to what happened the last time. So there's a poll done in February, but also the last results. And I want to just remind people that polling are snapshots at a particular period in time. This is not a prediction of what's going to happen on election day. And this poll was done, particularly the KwaZulu-Natal field work, because this was face-to-face, was done at a particular time when MK were winning court cases and Jacob Zuma, and the ANC kept trying to take Jacob Zuma to the courts, etc., and Zuma kept on prevailing. So Howard, the poll has nationally the ANC at 43.4% of the vote, which would be significantly down from the 57.5 percentage point. The DA would remain the official opposition. They would fall from just under 21% to 18.6% of the vote. And then in third place, you're going to expect me to say the EFF, but in this poll, and that's why, again, it was done at a particular time when MK was surging, the poll found that MK came in third at 14.4% and the EFF fourth at 11.4%. And then well below in fifth place is the IFP on 3.1%. So again, I just want to remind people what Queenin was saying earlier. There's something called the squeeze, where the ANC in the last month of every campaign I've observed claws back support. They've had more people, more resources, more energy, they cover more areas. So I would expect the ANC to grow from this 43.4%. By the way, I think the DA can also grow from that 18.6% because they can do the same in the Western Cape. But this is a very worrying national picture right now for the ANC, the DA, and the EFF.
So, Wayne, if you look at it as blocks, and I want to look at one block that would encompass the EFF, the ANC, MK as one, should we call it left, more radicalized block, that puts that segment of the voters, the voting population, at 70%, higher than it's ever been before, which would seem to indicate the complete collapse of the DA, the Action SA, no growth at all. In fact, a negative growth amongst the centrist, central right-leaning parties.
Yeah, so I think what's happening here is that a party like uMkhonto or Sizwe, who one would expect to fish in similar waters as the ANC and as the EFF, is also fishing in IFP waters. And the IFP is a party which is traditionally, which is part of the multi-party charter. So, I mean, Howard, what you've just raised is a good point. And again, maybe this is where when we assess this, the strength of the polls after the election, just raised a very, very good point about the 70% versus the 30%, because that would be a major setback for the multi-party charter.
So before we open this to Queenin and to Arthur to comment on these results, I just want to touch on maybe a few of the provinces. What are the results looking like in the Western Cape? Does the DA maintain its majority within the Western Cape?
Okay, so within the Western Cape, the first caveat is that the other section is quite high. And within that other section are undecided voters. So the DA would lose its outright majority if the election were to be held when the poll was done. They would fall to 44.4%. What's interesting, though, is that the ANC remains steady. Now, Ivor spoke about the ICJ earlier, and that would be an area within suburbs like Rylands and Gatesville in Cape Town where the ANC would believe they can grow support. However, we know that in recent by-elections, the ANC has been losing a lot of support in the rural coloured areas of the Western Cape. Now, the townships in Cape Town and the rural coloured towns, that's where its base of support is. So I was surprised that the ANC came in at 29.1. Now, remember I just told you that the ANC support is in those townships like Khayelitsha in Cape Town. In this poll, the EFF would be in third place on 9%. They would grow almost double their support, I think more than double their support from 2019. And again, I want to take a step back and I don't want to get too granular. How can is it possible that come election day, the ANC will again get 29%, but the EFF will grow to 9% because of its growth in the Cape Town townships? That is the area where the EFF is likely to grow. So Howard, just to go down, the big elephant in the room in Western Cape politics, a party which I speak about, maybe some people say too much, is where is Gayton McKenzie's Patriotic Alliance? Now, Gayton McKenzie's Patriotic Alliance is the party which has just won an ANC seat in near the town of Oudtshoorn, a relatively safe ANC seat. They went from 1% to 65%, staggering growth. We see Gayton McKenzie pulling large crowds across the length and breadth of the Western Cape. Where does he come up in the poll? He doesn't. I expected him to be in third place. In this poll, his party doesn't even come in fourth place. They come in fifth place behind Patricia de Lille's Good. And I find that quite surprising. I know that Queenin has and her colleagues have been covering Good. So these Western Cape numbers seem a bit all over the place. But as they stand today, Howard, the DA would need coalition partners. And when I look at the top 6 parties in the Western Cape, Howard, all those parties, if I look at below the DA, okay, ANC, EFF, Good, PA, Al-Jamaa, they have a history of working with each other more than the DA. This poll suggests that the DA has its work cut out in the final 9 days, but as I've said earlier, what the ANC does nationally, the DA can do in the Western Cape, and I expect this DA number to go up in the coming days.
Okay, quickly, let's talk before we open KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng as our 2 additional provinces that we want to watch.
Let's deal with Gauteng and then KwaZulu-Natal. Remember the ANC got just over 50% in 2019. If it wasn't for the great metro, the roadhouse, capital of the world, Ekurhuleni, the East Rand, the ANC would have lost its outright majority. It did well there. It shows the ANC falling to 41%, and I think this is a very likely range. So the ANC would fall to 41%. But equally, it shows the DA declining to 19% from about 27%. The EFF would be in third place on 12%, and uMkhonto Sizwe would surge above parties like Action SA, which took Gauteng by storm. Surge above parties like the Freedom Front, which came in 5th place in Gauteng in 2021, and get 8.6% of the vote. In this scenario, Howard, the ANC could do a deal with the EFF, could possibly do a deal with uMkhonto Sizwe and the Patriotic Alliance, but it will certainly need a coalition. But again here, I was surprised at how low the DA were. But maybe the DA are losing some votes to Action SA, some votes to the PA, some votes to Rise Mzansi, some votes to parties like Build One South Africa. But the DA would believe that it can increase its vote share, and so will Panyaza Lesufi and the ANC. Now we'll go to the most explosive of the results in KwaZulu-Natal. In our first survey, there was a scenario that 4 parties essentially could get over 20% of the vote, and MK was doing very, very well in that first survey. And I said, and I remember discussing, I said, look, MK have done well here, but this is surely their plateau. This is surely their ceiling. They cannot go above the 30-odd% is showing now. In this poll, and again, when we got this result and our mouths dropped and we dropped our pens and our coffee spilt all over the carpet, we said, wait a minute, please go back and double check how MK can be so high in KwaZulu-Natal. And again, these are face-to-face interviews. We rented very like 4x4s to make sure we covered the most rural parts of KwaZulu-Natal. And the person said, look, we were also surprised, but wherever we went, no party had more energy, more passion, more enthusiasm, more ground game than the MK party. And this shows MK party at 46% of the vote. Howard, it is staggering. Again, will this hold an election day? I think unlikely, but they are way ahead with the IFP in second place at 14.5. The DA down somewhat at 12.2, which I was a bit surprised by. And the ANC, where I was extremely surprised, falling to 11%. This would mean that the ANC support has collapsed in almost collapsed in KwaZulu-Natal. Do I think this will happen on election day? Not really, but this was the snapshot of a particular time, and these are staggering results, and I'm happy to discuss this further.
Wow, Wayne, those are some remarkable results. Queenin, what do you think?
I tend to agree with Wayne. I mean, the survey itself, when they talk about what could happen in Gauteng, right? Especially around the DA. I find that the new political parties which have been formed in the last couple of months since elections, your Bold One South Africa's Rise Mzansi, Action SA, fairly new as well in the game. I think that they are likely to affect the DA and not really the ANC. So it becomes tricky for the political landscape, because if the DA wants to grow in some way, it's going to be tough when there are three other parties that have a similar constituency, and not only that, that have similar principles. So I do think that it's going to be a very hard election for the DA, especially in Gauteng. And then when it comes to the issue around the PA, I'm actually really shocked, just as Wayne said, that the PA would be rated so low in the Western Cape. Because, yes, we have seen Gayton McKenzie, fill up stadiums. And I think besides that, the biggest precursor has been their performance in by-elections leading up to the national and provincial elections. So I think that it would be quite surprising if it is that the PA doesn't grow exponentially in the Western Cape. Whether the DA will fall under 50%, I don't think they will at this point. I do feel that they've been doing quite well when it comes to governing, especially in the city of Cape Town. And they have a very strong mayor, Jordan Hill-Lewis, who has really tried to connect with the people of Cape Town. So I don't see them drastically dropping in the Western Cape. And then when it comes to KZN, it's so tricky when it comes to KZN. And I think at the manifesto launch yesterday that I attended, the MK Party's manifesto launch, that's when I realized that, probably the IFP is in more trouble than the ANC when it comes to MK Party. And I know it's going to sound weird, but I think it's because they really are leading with Zulu nationalism. And it's kind of the same thing what the IFP has been based on, and their basis of how the party started. And I think Zuma has seen a gap. And because obviously the passing of Mangosuthu Buthelezi, he seems to be the most senior leader in the province at the moment, and I think he is taking advantage of it. Yesterday, there were so many.
Can I ask you to describe for us what it was like for those who weren't there? Because he filled out the Orlando Stadium, 64,000 seat stadium. Describe what was the atmosphere like? What was the experience like?
Yeah. So, they filled up the stadium, and it's mostly because they bussed in so many people from KZN, number one. They had a lot of people in their Zulu attire, Amabuto, which is like a Zulu kind of, what would I call it? A Zulu military kind of grouping that were there to usher him in. Zuma did not speak a word in English. His entire speech was in isiZulu, and I think that was telling of which direction the party is taking, a more regional kind of direction, I would say. Also very targeted at isiZulu speakers, which could be like one of the biggest tribes in our country and the most widely spoken language, as Wayne said earlier on. So the atmosphere very much KZN. It's almost as if they brought KZN to Johannesburg. Even the artists who performed there, KZN-based artists, a lot of traditional music, maskandi, and a lot of, Zulu nationalism that I saw yesterday. And it kind of indicated to me that the IFP needs to be as concerned as the ANC now Zuma is basically after their constituency, and it's direct at this point. So I do believe that MK Party will do well in KZN. Whether they will get that 46% Wayne was talking about, no, I don't agree. But I think it will be significant enough to put the ANC in a very bad position. But even the IFP needs to watch their back.
So, Ivor, tell us, is the ANC increasingly becoming a rural, uneducated, aging party? Because if their support base remains in places like Mpumalanga, Northwest, Limpopo, maybe parts of the Free State, but they're losing the more educated, the more affluent provinces, are we seeing a trend here where the ANC is being pushed really to represent rural aging voters?
Oh, don't forget that outside the metros, there's not only rural areas. There are lots and lots of what we call secondary cities, smaller cities, smaller towns, and I think the ANC is still strong in those areas. So it's not only rural voters, and I think we should be very careful of stigmatizing people in those areas as somehow uneducated or laissez-faire with political issues. I think it's definitely a different type of voter. It's someone who is struggling much more than an urban voter is, or someone in an urban area. But these are definitely not parochial or uneducated or somehow more traditional people. I think they are in the deep rural areas. The role of traditional authorities is particularly acute, is powerful. But that, I think, is not just a factor for the ANC. I think that's for most of those rural parties, especially in former homeland areas. So they're important interlocutors. But I think we need to be very careful around understanding sort of rural or small town or medium city voters.
So
can I just say one thing in a conversation which was beginning to emerge early on, which I think is an impressively very important conversation around this 30-70 split, is how do you put your finger on something which I thought was very, very interesting, and I think very, very important around the broader direction of the country, around how if we add up the ANC, the EFF, and the MK party, we're in a situation where in the broad structure of our politics, very little has changed. You still have a very strong nationalist politics dominating the political scene, and liberal politics has made very, very little inway. I do think that those are, so even though the composition of parties is changing and their majorities are changing and even the ANC is in decline, etc., but largely speaking, the political culture in South Africa is still profoundly nationalist in its core context, and a lot of that nationalism is rooted in questions of ethnicity and rooted in questions of race. So we are not seeing a huge movement away towards a South African politics more founded on the question of the individual, on individual rights. I think there's still a strong attachment to group identities, whether those identities are questions of race or questions of ethnicity. At least that is how political parties are mobilizing and contesting elections. There's another huge element here, which we haven't spoken about at all. There are those that are registered to vote and who are voting. Then there's a huge population in South Africa of those who are not registered to vote. Have historically, that portion of the South African population has been growing. So Wayne, you probably know the figure more accurately than I do, but it's a very, very substantial portion of eligible voters in South Africa who it's not just that they don't turn up on Voters' Day, but they actually don't even bother to register.
So the figures, if I can run you through, approximately 62 million South Africans, of whom 46 million are of voting age and eligible to vote. Of them, about 27.5 million actually register, and of those, about 18 million generally vote in a national election. So you've got about an extraordinary few number of people. 18 million of the 62 million South Africans will decide the future for the entire nation. means every vote
And the
counts.
key, and in absolute numbers, what we're talking about in all this electoral politics is really about those 10 million people that vote ANC. How many of them will switch? How many of them will stay at home? I mean, that's really what we're talking about in all these different parties, etc. It's that core ANC group of 10 million voters that is really the area of contestation here. But what's happened to the rest of those people? Those people that not only don't register or are not registered, or not only those people that don't turn out to vote, but don't even bother to register, which there are literally tens of millions. I mean, that for me is the major, is of huge concern, because it seems to me in the work that I was doing was that those people are they're not just not interested in politics, they are deeply interested in politics, but they're taking their politics increasingly outside the formal political domain. So they're playing their politics outside the formal constitutional institutions in South Africa. And I think it's those people that we have to watch going forward, not just in terms of number crunching and electoral politics, but to see how they express themselves politically going forward. I think that's the big ghost in the machine, which we very seldom talk about.
Oh, well, I do want to talk about something very important for next week, and that's what was termed the multi-party charter. And Galinda wants to know, like, what's happened. So first of all, Wayne, was there actually ever a coalition? Is this a real thing, or is it someone? I described it as John Steenhuisen's wet dream, and he told me I was writing about his nocturnal emissions. But it's not like these parties collapsed themselves into a consolidated group and decided to take on the ANC. They're fighting against each other in these elections without anything solid. And you and I were at an event this afternoon where it became quite clear that the DA was saying, well, in order to prevent a doomsday coalition, as they term it, ANC-EFF alliance, the DA would be happy to go into coalition with the ANC as the second worst alternative in comparison to the Doomsday Alliance. This multi-charter thing, is it real or was it someone's fantasy?
Let's just take one step back. Why you've seen someone like Bantu Holomisa lead the United Democratic Movement since 1999. They made a splash in the first election, and their returns have just got worse and worse and worse and worse. Why doesn't Bantu Holomisa merge with a bigger party? I don't know. I think Ivor would know this better than me, but essentially there is no Julius Malema, the leader of the third biggest party, and John Steenhuisen, the leader of the official opposition, get very few different perks than, say, Al-Jamaa, which have 1 seat, or the UDM, who have 2 seats. So I'm giving this example, a practical example, that Bantu Holomisa essentially almost has the same size of parliamentary support team as John Steenhuisen or Julius Malema. So essentially, there's no incentive for parties to merge. Also, we know that a lot of politicians are narcissists and think that they are more popular than they actually are. And we're going to see some narcissists look into the mirror the day after the election. I mean, there's some small parties running. There's this party by the former mayor of Midvaal, DA guy, who's going to do very poorly. But back to your question, Howard, as I digress. Okay, so the multi-party charter was set up to show South Africa's alternative, saying we hold on to our own identity, hold on to our own values, we are going to still continue as election, as our own entities. However, if there is a province or a city or a country called South Africa where we get 50% of the vote, we will have a predetermined agreements on certain things that we'll work together, and we'll use that very limited time. In South Africa, it's 14 days. We know that in the Netherlands, to form a coalition, it can take months. In Germany, it can take months. Israel, it can take months. In South Africa, all you have is 14 days. So these political parties said, look, if we get to form a government in Gauteng or KwaZulu-Natal or nationally, we will have agreed upon the basics. So Howard, essentially, if they don't reach that 50% nationally, which they're not, then it's a moot agreement. But I just want to clarify one thing which John Steenhuisen said. He said that if, in order to prevent the doomsday coalition with the ANC and the EFF, the DA would first have a discussion with all its multi-party partners. They wouldn't make the decision unilaterally, and they would discuss that as a collective first. I do want to make that point. But I hope I've explained that. So there's very little added benefit unless they get in a scenario in Gauteng or KZN or maybe nationally with that 50%. Otherwise, it'll just dissipate and will go down in the scrap heap of history as a nice idea with little impact.
So guys, let's turn our attention to the day after the results are announced. And let's work through some of the scenarios, what actually happens. Let us say the ANC is sitting at 46, 47%. Queenin, do they form a majority? Who do they bring into that coalition?
To be honest, and I think it's a trend we can look back and see in local government, the ANC prefers to work with smaller parties. And I think their first option would be to do that, to look at smaller parties that they aligned with. I mean, I don't know how well Al Jama is going to do in these elections, but it's particularly parties like Al Jama, Good Party. I think they'll be looking towards that direction before they even attempt looking at working with bigger parties like the DA and EFF, who are going to want a bigger stake when it comes to negotiations, right? The ANC has discovered that, with smaller parties, obviously they're willing to take whatever it is that they are offered. And it's a good opportunity if you are a 2-seat or 1-seat party in parliament and you get an opportunity to govern in any form. You are going to obviously appreciate that and take that opportunity. So that has been the model I see the ANC going for. But I think if it doesn't happen in that, if it doesn't go in that direction, I think potentially the EFF would probably be the first option. However, there's been a big pushback within the ANC, especially by the ANC veterans, who've said that the EFF are really bad partners. They are bad in terms of unpredictability. And you can see what they did in 2016 when it comes to the DA at local government, voting with the DA, helping the DA get, majority in the local governments, and then at the last minute just dropping them when things didn't go their way. So I think the veterans of the ANC have been very clear on the fact that they don't want to work with the EFF, and that if, there's a way to negotiate, the DA would be a better partner. And I know, there's probably been talks behind the scenes, but no one really wants to openly say that they're considering working with the ANC, especially when it comes to the DA. They never really want to openly talk about that possibility. But I see it playing out in that way.
So I think what Queen is saying there, that if they're at 47%, they're rats and mice that maybe make up the last 3%.
I would agree.
If they're sitting at 43, 44%, what happens?
Well, then if they want to reform a government, the necessity of working with bigger parties. They have an experience of working with the EFF, especially in Gauteng and at municipal level. I know that there are certain key people in the ANC that are open-minded to the EFF again. I would suspect that would be a candidate for them to work with, more so than MK. I think the personal issue there would forestall that option. So I'm not. The question would be though, whether I can see the advantage for the ANC. I think if the EFF do a lot worse than they're expecting to, if they do come in behind the MK in certain key areas, or their support base is sufficiently eroded by MK, I would imagine that there are constituents within the EFF that might be arguing against a coalition with the ANC, that in the medium or the long term it might be quite dangerous for them, especially if there's a sense that the party itself is stagnating and maybe even in decline, that an alliance with the ANC might not be an opportunity but might actually be a liability. So I think there's all sorts of interesting things going on there. IFP, I think, is the most likely coalition partner for the ANC, although if it suffers the kind of setbacks which Wayne and Queenin are talking about, then I think, it's an insignificant player then. And then I know that there are elements of business which are calling very strongly, or have been mobilizing very strongly behind the scenes, for a DA-ANC alliance. I don't think that's completely off the table. I think if an ANC-EFF alliance proves to be untenable or impossible, then I do think there will be elements within the ANC and even potentially within the DA, if it does really badly, for some kind of ANC-DA alliance. I know that would make lots of people in business very happy in that situation. So I think there are a couple of scenarios which are available. Interested to hear what the others are. Can I just say one thing though, generally? I think this is where there's something unprecedented in this election, and I do think we have to say it's a sign that something in our democracy is really beginning to work. Because what has definitely shifted since the state capture years is, I think, political parties, especially the ANC, has come to understand that performance in government actually matters for your electoral results. That you need to be seen to perform relatively well in government in order to secure electoral votes, at least a portion of the electoral votes. Whereas I think historically it made no difference how well or badly you governed. People voted for the ANC. That's shifted. That's changed now. So I think in part of these conversations and part of these alliance negotiations, I think these questions of institutional performance and which parties are able to bring together credible candidates who actually can contribute to running institutions, I think that's going to be part of the mix for the very, very first time in our history. I think that's a hugely positive thing. I hope Queenin and Wayne don't think I'm terribly naive in that regard. But I do think for the very first time ever, actually, there is an institutional dynamic and a positive institutional dynamic at work in this election, which is promising for the future.
Well, let me pose to the panel a question, because there is much doubt whether Cyril Ramaphosa can sit in the same cabinet as Julius Malema. So if, for example, the ANC is polling in the low to mid-40s and needs to bring in a 7, 8, 10% of an EFF, do we first see a fight for control of the ANC between Paul Mashatile, maybe Fikile Mbalula, and Cyril Ramaphosa, where Ramaphosa gets ousted, and then, for example, a Paul Mashatile brings in the EFF as the coalition party? Is that a possibility? Are we looking at an internal ANC battle for control before we see who the appropriate coalition partner is? Shall we start with Queenin and then go on to Wayne?
I think the internal party dynamic right now in the ANC, I don't see an ousting of Ramaphosa, because that usually happens when they go to conference, and their conference terms are not aligned with the election terms, and that's why many times the president is ousted. It's because a new president of the party has been elected, essentially. But I don't see that happening with Cyril. I think that what could happen is that if they do want to collaborate with the EFF, I see the EFF wanting the deputy president position. And that's when things start getting tricky, because we know the ANC and they're fighting for positions, and it's always been relentless in the party. There's high contestation for these positions. It would put then the likes of Paul Mashatile in a very bad situation. And it would also make the role of deputy president in the ANC kind of one that's very ceremonial, right? Which means that it would change even how the party contests in its internal elections in terms of choosing leadership, because it would now be seen as a kind of a redundant position. You're not going to get anything in government. You might have to be full-time at Lutuli House, less glamorous than, what ANC members would want. So I do think that it would cause a lot of havoc for the governing party, because there would be less positions for them, number one. But I do predict that, the EFF is set its sights already at this point on certain positions. And anyone who has negotiated with Julius, even the ANC itself, has said that he is ruthless when it comes to negotiating, and he's willing to leave the table with nothing if he doesn't get what he wants. So it will be a very tricky situation for the ANC, but I think internally right now, they're coming across as very united, but I think it's just for elections. I know after elections, things are going to go back to the fraction and what we used to see with the ANC. But I do predict that it would put them in a very bad situation. I think that already now in the party, they are talking about future positions and contestation, who's going to be the next president. I'm hearing that the likes of Fikile Mbalula have presidential ambitions. I'm aware that, of course, Paul Mashatile would want to be the president as well. So we're also looking at the likes of Nomvula Mokonyana. She's trying to break through and be the first ever female president of the ANC and essentially of the country. But we all know that it's going to be a bloodbath in the next internal election of the ANC.
Wayne, time to maybe nail some colours to the mast.
Yeah, the ANC are, whatever one may think of the ANC, they're a pragmatic organization. It's activists and those who seek to benefit from it being in power who would want the person to lead the party who's most likely to get them the most votes. It's clear that Cyril Ramaphosa is far more, at this stage, and this might change after the election, today, is far more popular than Paul Mashatile. I mean, of course, he's from Gauteng, the most populous province, but Ramaphosa is regarded much higher by the rank and file ANC members and by the public than him. And with respect to Fikile Mbalula, we can all have presidential ambitions. I'm sure that Ramaphosa is far more popular than him, and with respect to Nomvula Mokonyane as well. So I think ANC people from across the length and breadth of this country would take a step back and see and make the determination of who's most likely to make sure they rule as many municipalities as possible and have as many ministerial positions as possible. So Shirley-Ann Fantona's question, the ANC will win, but they'll have, as I'm seeing the question, it'll be a weaker victory than before. So Howard, I think before there are a few steps to go. I agree exactly with what my colleagues have said. The scenario of ANC of 48 to 49 and 49.9 are going to be those smaller parties. Scenario 2 is the IFP leaving the multi-party charter and saying, look, the multi-party charter is a great idea. We love Chris Pappas and the DA in KwaZulu-Natal, but maybe we'll kiss and make up at the local government elections. Let's go back to government and let's maybe take KwaZulu-Natal. So I think that is a scenario which, by the way, investors might welcome because the IFP are have pretty stable economic policies, pragmatic economic policies. Scenario 3, and I'm going to get to your question now about the EFF, is the PA and those small parties I just referred to. Why do I put the PA at lower down the IFP? Because Queenin just spoke about Julius being a ruthless negotiator. You and I today, Howard, had the privilege of being in the company of Kenny Kunene and a few other political leaders. He's the vice president of the Patriotic Alliance. Patriotic Alliance are also ruthless negotiators. They are not easy coalition partners. They can upstage you. They can get more media attention than you, unlike those smaller parties and unlike the IFP. Once we go through those scenarios, we arrive where the ANC is standing at the door, and then one door says the Democratic Alliance, the other door says the EFF, and the door just furthest behind says MK, and with that MK uMkhonto Sizwe room, they have a small side entrance for Ace Magashule, the former Secretary General of the ANC, who has his own party in the Free State. So what door would the ANC open first? I think that decision can tear the ANC apart because whatever decision they make, it'll be a more divided NEC. And again, if they open the EFF door, the MK door, that might well be the Cyril Ramaphosa having to resign as the leader of the ANC and as the president of the country. But I think at this stage, with 9 days out, I think the idea of an ANC-DA grand coalition is very slim. And therefore, if the ANC, and I'm saying it's, even though the Polars involved has the ANC at 43, I think they'll get to at least 46%. I don't think they'll need to make that consequential decision about ENCA or the DA. But if they had to choose one door, even if it would mean Ramaphosa having to have a hard look at the mirror and consider his future as the president of the country, I think they'd favor the EFF door today.
Is it possible that we could have some interesting mix and matches, that national level looks different to what it looks like in a province? So could, for example, the DA, the EFF and MK decide to keep the ANC out of government in KwaZulu-Natal, while have a very different looking coalition on a national level?
So I'll just answer that question briefly, because I know that one of Queenin's colleagues raised that in the Daily Maverick recently. I think what we might see, and remember, there are many municipalities, including key metros, which are currently under coalition control. I believe that if there is the need for a national coalition and or a provincial coalition, it will be an all-encompassing coalition which will flow down, and you might see the renegotiation of deals on a metro level. I mean, parties want stability, particularly if the ANC, let's have a scenario of the ANC and the DA and the EFF not having the greatest of elections, and the IFP, because the MK, so you have these four established parties not doing so well. I think they're going to have to go back to the drawing board and say, look, people are not liking the way we are working in coalitions. People are not liking the way we are governing. We need to do a better job. So, Howard, I think and by the way, if you have your scenario, your question is one thing for KwaZulu-Natal, one thing for Nelson Mandela Bay, I don't think that'll work. You'll need an all-encompassing deal which would flow all the way down.
I want to, before we come back, because we're drawing to a close, so I want to ask our audience, we've been going for about an hour and a half. If you have any questions, please post them now. There's some quick questions I want to actually get through before we come to some closing questions. And I want to tell you what my closing questions are going to be now, even though I'm not asking you to answer them yet. I'm going to ask two questions at the end. What happens if no one can form a majority? What happens then? And what are our red lines? Many people believe that, like, when the rand went to 10 rand to the dollar, it was a red line, it was time to go. Many believe that, for example, if there's an ANC-EFF alliance, it's time to go. Are there still red lines? Because we keep on changing our red lines in this country of what we believe the doomsday looks like. So those are going to be my two final questions. But I do want to ask people, if you're watching us on Zoom, on YouTube, and on Facebook, or even on Instagram, please, this is the time to ask and get some questions answered. Quick fire round, one word. Someone asked a question about Israel voting and the fact that South Africans were deprived of their vote because the Israeli embassy in Tel Aviv is in fact closed. The answer is, of course, yes, that's exactly what happened, but people had the opportunity to take the IEC to court, and I don't know for what reasons they decided not to do so. So they deprived themselves of their right to vote. There were only 350 people who registered to vote in Tel Aviv anyway, a tiny number, considering there's probably between about 50 and 100,000 people in Israel of either South African passports or descent of South African passports, but yet they failed to take any action. So if you fail to take action, you live with the consequences because you failed to do so. There was a question about ZANU-PF coming to help the ANC. Anyone got any concerns about that at all? Election rigging, one of the great skills that have come out of Harare.
Yeah, one needs to see the size of the delegation. I mean, I know that there is solidarity between the ANC and the ZANU-PF, but maybe, I don't know the details. How many people is it? Is it just a press release? But maybe ZANU-PF can learn a thing or two about democracy when they come observe our elections.
So one of the great things
run by the IEC. The election is run by the IEC. So And even if they do send a large delegation, which I think Wayne's absolutely correct, is unlikely to be more than a press release. It really is. This is the IEC's election, so I wouldn't be concerned about that.
So just given that I drafted all the regulations and the legislation relating to elections, it's really important that one of the things that we drafted was the fact that the election results are in fact filled out, signed by all the party agents. There are 3 copies made. One copy stays with the ballot paper, 1 copy stays to be captured, and 1 copy of this document, which is signed by all the party agents, gets posted to the door of the voting station. And all the party agents take photographs of that page and send it through to their own parties. On the IEC systems that I'm sure Wayne and I will be looking at on the night of the 29th or on the 30th, you in fact have an image of what gets captured, and you can compare that image to the image that your own party agents have sent to you from the field from each of the 23,500 voting stations around the country. So you can verify that the results per polling station were accurately collected. That's something that doesn't take place in places like Zimbabwe, and that's why I have so much more faith in the legitimacy of South African election results in comparison to some of our neighbors. We had a question of whether you make a cross or a tick. Wayne, I think you answered that question. You said be safe.
Be safe. Look, you can do anything, but I don't want to give you ideas. Just make a cross and make sure that cross is within the square of the party you choose to place your trust in. The key thing is your intention. Your intention for who you want to vote for must be clear, so you can put whatever you want, but just what happens in that case. Let me give an example. If you had to say, I vote for Howard in the block of the Howard Sachs team party, people can challenge that. People cannot challenge you when you put a cross in the block of your party. So I was just saying, make life easy for yourself, make life easy for the tired poll workers counting the votes, and just make a cross.
And keep it within the square. I mean, sometimes when you count ballots, you see people make crosses next to everyone and tick 1. And you have to try work out, was the intention to say yes to the one that they ticked and no to the ones that they don't? Or they write comments. Whatever you do, don't write your name on the ballot paper. Don't sign the ballot paper. Don't write any comments on the ballot paper. Just make a cross inside the square next to the party that you want to select. It's most importantly. We've been reminded multiple times, you must take your ID document with you to the polling station. That's how they identify who you are and delete your name off the voters roll. What happens, says Lionel, when he, I think it's Lionel, or no, Ilana, she's lost her ID book. Home Affairs will be open on election day to be able for you to go get a new ID book, or go now. Don't even wait for election day, but you must have a ID book in order to do it. Question.
Ilana must go now, Howard. Sorry, don't give the idea of the election day. She must go this week.
Okay. Load shedding. Ivor, will load shedding return on the 30th of May?
Well, there are 2. I mean, I hear different stories. One is that extraordinary amounts of diesel are being burnt. The other story is that we are seeing very profound structural changes in the electricity grid. Much greater proportion of generation coming from private companies through renewables. So the stabilization of the grid looks like it's because of much greater role played by renewables in the generation part. I'm not quite sure which story is correct. More diesel or more renewables. I suspect. I trust Tim Cohen. He seems to suggest that it's because there's some quite profound shifts in the character of generation in South Africa. So it sounds like day after the election, we're still going to have electricity supply.
There's a question about Bossa and a question about smaller parties and whether you're wasting your vote for a smaller party. I want to answer that one because the truth is, as long as a party will get 45,000 votes, they will be in parliament. So even if you want to vote for a Bossa or Razam Zanzi or one of the other smaller or emerging parties, a Sara, Queenin Masuabi, if you want to vote for them, as long as they get 45,000 votes, your vote is definitely not wasted. And the more voices, the multi voices we have in parliament add to the richness of our democracy. So if that's the party you favor, absolutely feel free, go and vote for them. That's really, really important. There is no such thing as a wasted vote, providing your party gets above 45,000 votes in these elections. Any other
Can I
questions?
just step in there?
Sure.
I just wanted to say, yes, it's not a waste, because when you look at why Parliament exists, it's an oversight kind of establishment, and no matter how small the party is, even if it's one seat, there's so much you can do in Parliament to hold the executive accountable, right? And I make an example with the ATM, with the work they did around Phala Phala. And they were able to maneuver to a point where there was a vote in Parliament around whether this should be taken up and investigation should be started around Phala Phala. So I can say that it doesn't matter how small the party is. If you have a party that you want to see in Parliament, vote for them and see what they can do on that oversight level.
Cool. Well, definitely, I think that's a very valuable point. And don't forget, for example, even Patricia de Lille, tiny party in Parliament, and what she did in exposing the arms corruption as well. So the more voices we have in Parliament, absolutely, the better it is. We've had a request just to go through the 3-ballot system again very quickly. Shall I give it a shot and you can all add in? There are, in fact, 2 elections that are taking place on the 29th of May. One election is for your provincial legislature. Gauteng is going to vote for a Gauteng legislature. The Free State will vote for a Free State legislature. That's one of the votes. So I want to throw that away. You've now got 2 ballots left, and both of those ballots are for a second election, and that election is for the National Assembly. In the old days, going back 5 years, you voted once, and the way the Constitution was drafted is it was counted in 2 different ways. It was counted per province, and 200 seats were allocated per province based on the number of people in every province, and another 200 seats were then used to top up to make sure we restored overall proportionality, to make sure that no one got screwed along the process. The problem then came is because the Constitutional Court decided that we need to have independent candidates in these elections. And not only that some parties can contest Gauteng, but won't contest the Free State. So how do you restore overall proportionality where every province has a different selection of people standing in that province? And the way they do it, and I don't want to get too technically, is you vote in your province, they allocate the seats to Parliament, and then they say, well, hold on, we're not sure if it's going to be overall completely proportionate or not. So we have a second ballot that then restores overall proportionality based on a ballot paper that's common between all 9 provinces. So you can change your votes. You don't have to vote for the same party in all three ballots, although the vast majority of people do. But it will just take you an extra minute when you're in, and maybe you want to be creative. Maybe you've got a special interest, maybe in the Western Cape, you want to secede. And Wayne, what's the party that wants to break away from
Cape Independence?
Cape Independent Party.
Referendum. No, but there's also the Referendum Party.
So maybe you want to vote that one in Cape Town, but for national level, you want to vote for Bossa. Maybe you want on your provincial legislature to vote for the Patriotic Alliance. So you've got lots of choice. And as we know, there are only 2 problems in life: no choice and too much choice. So with that, guys, let's come to our final 2 questions that I warned you about. What happens if no party can, in fact, muster together a coalition? We know the results are announced usually within 5 days of the elections. In terms of the Constitution, 14 days we need to elect our new president. What happens if no one can cobble together an actual government?
Well, I think it's so unlikely, Howard. there will be a government formed. So I think that's it's a unlikely hypothetical. There will be a government that will be formed, one way or another. And the most likely scenario is it'll be the ANC with some small parties.
Okay. Queenin, have you got any doubts that in fact we may not have a government at all? Is this something we shouldn't worry about?
Yeah, I don't think it's something we need to worry about, especially at national level. I think that the ANC will be able to get the majority, or, as Ivor said, form a government with smaller parties. I don't see any other scenario at this point.
Okay, so our final question is, what are the red lines? If it's an ANC EFF coalition, Wayne, are you heading to the airport?
Howard, the sunset this evening was absolutely incredible. Look, again, I agree with what Ivor and Queenin just said. I think that ANC EFF coalition as of tonight is an unlikely one. I think there's more chance of minority government, which would be a complicated mess than an ANC EFF or ANC DA or ANC MK coalition, i.e. the ANC just says, look, we're not the largest party. These smaller parties are being too greedy. We need to keep the positions for ourselves and let's try govern. So I'm not heading to the airport, Howard.
Okay. Is anyone else got a red line that they're worried about? If the DA forms a coalition with Gayton McKenzie and Action SA, is anyone worried?
Look, I mean, listen, I've just come back from the US, where every transaction, even for a coffee, mineral water was a body blow. So just realizing that even if there are red lines that are crossed politically, I'm not heading easily to any airport, because I think we are stuck here and we have to work this out here, I think, largely, apart from a few that can. I do think, though, that there's a huge risk. There are two scenarios in my mind, not just related to parties or coalitions. South Africa has an extraordinary tendency towards magical thinking. I think the EFF, for example, is a party of magical thinking. I think the Zuma politics was a politics of magical thinking. So I think South Africa has tendencies towards extraordinary magical thinking. And radical, self-righteous radical thinking. And I think that is an enormous danger in South Africa. But what I think is emerging in South Africa as well at the same time is a very strong pragmatism. And it's a pragmatism which is grounded in the fact that actually, if you want to run an economy, if you want to do anything, you need effective, more or less capable administrations. So as magical as your thinking gets, I think there's a strong tendency to realize and understand that we also need functioning organizations. So I think that there's this great tension. And at the current moment, my reading is, just by virtue of the kind of the work that I've been involved in around public service reform, where over the last couple of weeks, we've managed to get reforms through Parliament, which are historically unprecedented in South African history, actually. I'm starting to think that we are erring on the side of pragmatism. So even if we get coalitions coming together, which are really, really appalling for us in principle, I do think that there's a growing pragmatism in South African politics, which has some momentum, which we can certainly throw out, give some support to. So that's my season. So I'm not running to any airports, certainly not now, and I'm going to throw my lot in with a growing institutional pragmatism in South Africa.
So to our three remarkable panelists this evening, I think the one thing we understand is we're in for one hell of a ride over the next few weeks, not just as we approach the election, but in the weeks that follow as we try to cobble together a coalition. There's never a dull day in Africa. And I think the amazing thing is, no matter what gets thrown at us, we generally always seem to come up with some sort of working solution. And I think that's the point that Ivor Chipkin has been making this evening. So to a remarkable panelist, let us remind our audience, you cannot not vote. Democracy also doesn't just happen once every 5 years. You have to be an active member of society. You have to participate. But if you're staying at home, if you're not going out there to make your cross on the ballot paper, you lose all credibility to ever complain about anything again. This is your one opportunity to be a revolutionary. Once every 5 years, we get the opportunity to go and overthrow our government. Don't waste it. Go vote. Vote wisely. And, you know, they used to say, go vote often, but at least this time we actually can, because there are 3 ballots. We can actually go vote often on the 29th of May. To our panelists, a huge thank you for joining us this evening. Wayne, you wanted to comment just before we go?
I don't want you to confuse people. I don't think you can go vote. You can only go vote once, Howard.
Vote once, but vote 3 times while you're in the polling station.
Okay, good. Okay.
Fantastic. Okay. Guys, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate all the amazing advice that you've given people this evening, and more importantly, the great, remarkable insight that you've shared with all of us. Queenin, we'll be reading all of your stuff on Daily Maverick. Really appreciate it. Wayne, we look forward not only to reading your content, but we look forward to watching you on ENCA election morning, or the day after election. You're coming on 5 a.m. in the morning.
That's correct. 5 a.m. It's going to be sensational.
Oh.
And Ivor, where can we go and look at all of your stuff? And tell us quickly, you've written the book on state capture. Tell us where we can go buy it.
Shadow State, most bookshops. Otherwise, you can find me at the New South Institute or Gibbs, Gordon Institute for Business Science. New South Institute or Gibbs. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Please leave us a message in the comment section on Zoom, on Facebook, YouTube, as well as on Instagram. And don't forget, if you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe so we can make it a little easier for us to communicate with you again. Good night, everyone. We'll see you after the elections, and we'll discuss what actually happened on election night, 29 May. Good night.
Ciao. Good night.
Bye.